Many more questions our audience want to raise. We only have an hour for the debate. We've done a quarter of an hour already, so I'm going to move on to another question. Before I do, a reminder that you can join the debate on Twitter in Britain, or indeed wherever you are in the world watching this. Our hashtag is BBCQT, and you can follow us at BBC Question Time. If you're in the UK, you can text comments on what's being said to 83981 and use the red button to tell you what others are saying. Right, let's move on to a question. This from Iso Mudau, please.
Is it racism over?
Is racism over? Andile?
Certainly not. South Africa remains, by and large, a white racist society. And the ironic thing is that in 1994, we did not end racism. Our idea of reconciliation meant that we did not address the historical question which shapes racism, the land question. 20 years later, only about 7% of the land has gone back to black people. The issue of transformation of the labor market, the issue of poverty, the issue of even the housing where black people live, we continue to exist as it was under apartheid. The ANC, to make things worse, has provided services to black people which are sometimes inferior to those that were provided by the apartheid regime. The housing, RDP house, you must go look at one of those things. So the truth of the matter is structurally, South Africa remains anti-black because black people suffer in South Africa. That is why when workers in Marikana demanded a living wage, the ANC sent in the police and massacred them instead of... And that was done to protect white capital. That was done to protect white capital. That was done to protect the interest of the ANC leadership, which has joined white capital to oppress black people. Therefore, the black majority in South Africa have a vote. But let us be clear, we remain marginalized and excluded. And the ANC manages the project and the DA, by the way. If you go to Cape Town, see the conditions of black people.
It's only 20 years since Nelson Mandela was elected president in the first ever democratic election. We've had racism in South Africa, started under British colonial rule. Exactly. And was intensified under apartheid. When I was a boy living in Pretoria, and my parents were active in the struggle in Pretoria, you couldn't sit on the... black people couldn't sit on the same park bench, couldn't go into the same parks. I couldn't play as a football or cricket with anybody who didn't have a white skin. That has stopped. So apartheid, in its formal institutional sense, has been abolished. But you cannot abolish the legacy just in 20 years. Of course you've still got racist attitudes. Of course you've still got a lot of institutional heritage here. But when I come back to South Africa, compared with when we left in '66, this is a completely different country. It's a country in which people do have rights. It may not be perfect. Of course it isn't perfect. You can't become perfect in just 20 years when you have this long history. And there's a lot of work to do. But recognize what has been achieved.
Man on the right there, you say yes. Yes, you. Far away.
I have to say, institutional racism in South Africa still continues, right? And the thing is, there has been transformation of some sort, but that hasn't been helped by ANC policy. There needs to be a redress in policy.
What do you mean by institutionalized racism? What are you pointing at?
Racism at every level. So you're still having massive racism in corporate environments. You're still having black kids who struggle to get into private schools, who are still, because they're in lower classes and because ANC handed out education is so inferior, they have an inability to then move on, to get into university and to liberate themselves. But equally, on that point, it needs to be noted that you can't have, and you simply can't have this redress happening in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. It needs to be over a long term.
I think what's happening here is we're not answering the gentleman's question. He asked if racism is still real. It is still real. It's a fundamental problem that we live with in our country, and we have to acknowledge it, look it in the eye, and talk about how we're going to deal with it socially. But there's a difference between racism and racial inequality. Racial inequality is the economic fruit of apartheid. Poverty is black, access to education and lack of access to resources is black. All of these fruits of apartheid are still with us today. And to conflate the two is a mistake, because, Andile, I would argue that a lot of what you just said is actually quite racist. I would argue that to say that under apartheid services were better is a shocking indictment. To say that the ANC hasn't done, I mean, I'm from the Democratic Alliance. I do not deny that the ANC has made massive strides in improving people's lives. You cannot say that a government that was guilty of a crime against humanity did a better job of delivering to black South Africans. You're just trying to be radical. I don't think that's responsible. And I actually think what you also are doing, is stirring up this white capital, black capital question and ignoring the real issues at play, which is that the ANC has got labor, it's got big businesses, and it's got politics all in one pot, working together against the vast majority of people who don't have access to these power blocks. That's what happened at Marikana. Black people are profiting from Marikana. Black people are profiting from big business. And the reason they're profiting is their connection to the ANC. It's not just their race.
If you go to the Western Cape, where the Democratic Alliance is in power, and you look at the conditions of black people, where we live, on farms, you know, you said our people are being shot and removed by your government there. I mean, the farm workers have been killed for demanding a living wage by your government there, and you said that is not racism. For you, you accept that less than 10% of the wealth of this country is owned by black people. The majority of wealth is in white hands, and for you, that's not racism.
I do not accept that.
Let me conclude.
I agree with you when you say that there hasn't been enough success in land reform.
I'm racist. You say I'm racist. I'm saying to you.
You say that South Africa is a battle between black and white, rather than a battle to eradicate poverty and to eradicate racial inequality. You want to create a race war, and you want to intensify and accentuate racism in order to ensure that you get platforms to speak on. And instead, the issues you should be dealing with are economic inequality, which is racialized.
Malcolm X spoke about house Negroes. You know, house Negroes are black people who identify with the oppressors of the black majority. And you speak like a house Negro because you don't see it.
And you speak like a racial nationalist and a demagogue.
The question is racism over?
And I want to get back to the real question and not the colorful rhetoric. Even if it gets you applause, it doesn't help us.
Exactly.
On the actual issue, I actually only partly agree with you, Lindiwe, on the more substantive question. I do agree with you that there's a difference between the question of racism and the structural elements of racism. Where I agree with the more sane part of Andile's response is that you can't divorce the two. Because the reality is that when we talk about apartheid geography, for example, that's not an economic problem, it's not a socio-economic problem. As black people, we experience that as black exclusion from the democratic South Africa.
Pick Bilter.
Yes, again, I want to make an appeal. I think our people here would be interested to know at one stage, during a discussion with Mr. Mandela, he reprimanded me, saying to me, "You are driving your right white wing into a rebellion." And then I said to him, "But would you then rather negotiate with them?" And he said to me, no, you know and I know that none of us would wish to live or govern a country where we are threatened by the devastation of violence. Mr. Mandela seriously and earnestly believed that political power acquired by violence is not sustainable. And that was why he was prepared not to be dictated to by the bitterness that he had experienced, but said at times a leader must move ahead of his flock. These are his words. There are times when a leader must move ahead of his flock and take decisions even if they are unpopular, on condition that the leader is convinced it's for the benefit and the long-time benefit of his people.
Mr. Mada's question was, is racism over in this country? Is it over in your view?
There are signs of it, but then it's our duty to try and eradicate it in a way that doesn't give offense. You take the Cape, province, for instance, where this lady has an important role to play. The whole world knows that the so-called brown people, I consider them also as Afrikaners. We speak the same language, Afrikaans. They're my blood. There's not an Afrikaner with our colored blood in his body. So my point is, we know that since the landing of Van Riebeeck and later, all 300-400 years, the brown people were in a majority there. To come now and tell the brown people, no, you are only so many percent of the population, that only so many percent can get jobs. I mean, that is really, you know, this is the closest to racism that I ever got.
Well, the issue of racism in South Africa is on its way out. If we were to implement the legacy of Comrade Nelson Mandela. It is on its way out, and it is our responsibility to make sure that it works out of the lives of South African people. The African National Congress has always stood for non-racialism, and we fought for it to say we want a South Africa that is non-racial, non-sexist, and democratic. However, in order for us to get there, we have to stop scratching each other on our faces and get to the bottom of how do we collectively move together exactly the way that Madiba had. I'll tell you that when Nelson Mandela walked out of prison, there were many of us who were not in the country here, who were outside in exile, who were ready to come and fight. If it meant killing somebody, we were going to do that. However, this man here walked into our camps and said to us, I hear you that this is what you want to do. However, the South Africa that you need is a South Africa that is reflected in your own document called the Freedom Charter that said South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white.
The woman in the second row in the front here, or in the front indeed, you ma'am.
The problem is that black people always remain at the bottom. Whether you're middle class, whether you're wealthy, you always remain at the bottom. The white people always remain at the top. So we're having mental issues where we need to eradicate white supremacy thinking and black inferiority thinking. The important question that I want to ask is, yes, Nelson Mandela gave the oppressor property rights, peace, but what did the oppressor give the black people? Just, I'm sorry, let's hug, let's kiss. Until we address that issue, then we'll realize that racism is still a big issue in our country.
I don't think we should reduce it to that level of what did Nelson Mandela give. Yes. Nelson Mandela assisted in giving South Africa across the board. Okay. He gave his own life to make sure that all of us, black and white, take responsibility. The white, as you say, they might have their superiority complex today. The blacks, as you say, might have so-called inferiority complex. But one thing I can assure you is that there's a difference between his time when he was here and now. I wouldn't be sitting here. You wouldn't be sitting there. We wouldn't be living where we live.
Okay. Speak.
I think we owe it to the legacy of Tata Madiba. As this panel, as this house, he says in his speech, I have fought against black domination and I have fought against white domination. In other words, we as South Africans, we need to come to a point where we realize that democracy is a system and freedom is a way of life. We need to accept each other from where we come from and where we intend to go. Because as the panel is sitting there, what I see there as a South African, I see the leaders of South Africa who are giving us hope that they will work together to a better South Africa. This cheap political scoring is not going to assist this country in the legacy of Mandela.
Yes, do you want to come back on that?
We spoke earlier about, the ANC listening to people, listening to how they feel, understanding, where they're coming from. And I think what's happening in this room is that we're talking about an anger that exists, particularly amongst black South Africans, and a sense of dispossession, a sense of lack of access to both economic resources, but also to dignity and pride that comes with what is left from our apartheid past. And I think what is dangerous is that that anger can be turned into a cheap political tool for people to then turn each other into racial opponents. People who say they stand for black people against white people. People who say they stand for Indian people against colored people. That is a huge danger that exists in our country. So if there's a legacy of Mandela, it must be that we cannot accept that politics can be turned into a racial battle in which only the heads of political parties that advance these racist policies become the victors.
Peter Hain.
I wanted to make just a British point, which is that there was a young man murdered on our streets, a black youngster, British youngster called Stephen Lawrence, a little while ago, by racist white thugs. Now, Britain's never had apartheid, but we have had racism deeply embedded in our society, and it takes a long time to get it out. And I think we should distinguish between that and the difficulties that the ANC is facing in government, and maybe the shortcomings that it's criticised for. There's a difference between these two issues.
Okay. No, but I'm going to go on to another question. From Homotso Makoro, please. Homotso Makoro.
Yes, I'd like to know, is it not time for South Africa to pursue a more radical approach to wealth redistribution, similar to that of Zimbabwe?
Did you hear that? Is it not time for South Africa to adopt a more radical stance on wealth redistribution, similar to that of Zimbabwe? Peter Hain.
Well, Mugabe's approach, if you want to use that as an example, to land distribution, I believe in land redistribution. I think that was absolutely right. What Mugabe did is he literally grabbed the land, put not just the odd white farmer out of work, but 100 black workers at least on every farm, and the farms fell into destitution, they weren't farmed, and Zimbabwe, which used to feed not just itself, but the whole of southern Africa, had to start importing food. So if you're going to tackle land distribution, you've got to do it in a sensible way that makes sure that if you're transferring ownership, those farms are farmed in an efficient way to feed the people and not end up, as Zimbabwe ended up, having to import food, which is a completely crazy and reactionary policy.
All right, you, sir, in the striped shirt.
Yeah, thank you very
yes.
much. Sorry, sir, we don't need the European methods of doing our own land reforms, because there's no way that you can justify, Peter Haines, to tell us that this is how it should be done. We're going to do it our own way. And in fact, we need our land. As a matter of agents. We're going to do it, the Mugabe, if we need to do it, because here we are not talking ANC. ANC is a tiny little dot on the map of South Africa, because we've got many parties here, and even the people who vote don't make even half of the entire population of this country. And then we are saying, look at me, I'm still very young, fairly young. I'm a future leader, a decision maker. We're going to do it quadrupled what Mugabe did.
Lindy Wezulu.
Well, I think
do
that,
what Mugabe did.
Well, I will not address the issue of Zimbabwe here, because I fully agree that when we talk about redistribution of wealth, it is important that it also addresses the past imbalances, number one. Number two, the whole issue of redistribution of the land. The African National Congress put in place proper legislation, proper regulation, in order for us to address that. And the reason why we did that was simply because we're not going to collapse our South Africa. We're not going to kill any of the systems that were going to be good for us as a way forward. The African National Congress now has accepted that some of the mechanisms that we put in place to address those issues are not effective. It is this very African National Congress that has come out to say the willing buyer, willing seller policy is not working. Let us look for another way of dealing with it, because at the end of the day, the black people who have been without land for a very long time, we need to give them the land. However, as a matter of principle, you're not going to take the land and give it to people when you have not empowered them enough to be able to produce in order for that land to be productive.
David, my answer to the question is no. We don't need radical land redistribution policies like in Zimbabwe. And the reason for it is that it is an unnecessarily high-risk solution to a correctly identified problem. But what is the problem? And it's interesting because the problem is actually implicitly conceded in what Lindiwe has just said. And it's actually that the existing policies, in terms of their design, are perfectly adequate. But but the ANC hasn't faithfully and efficiently implemented it. They are behind their own targets on land redistribution. They can't do a proper government audit of how much land is owned by the state. They've messed up black economic empowerment. Education is in a poor state. And my question to South Africans in this audience is, if our indices on inequality, poverty, unemployment look different, and the land redistribution policy, as it currently is, had been faithfully implemented, would that gentleman have posed that question?
Faithfully
Okay, the gentleman here in the front. Man here in the front. The gentleman here in the front.
I'd like to agree with what you're saying. I think the ANC and this government needs to smell the coffee. They don't need to use politics and diplomacy and talking about having peaceful talks and the rest of it, and talk about these things. What we need to smell the coffee of is basically, you're talking about redistribution of wealth. When the ANC is redistributing this wealth amongst their leaders, using their monies for their own coffers, and that we need these monies to be distributed to the people. If you go and look at employment, if we go into the history of 1920 or 1930, like Pick Botha's time, can I tell you that the African farmers of this land taught the white man how to farm in this land? And let me tell you further, it's this government, this old government, that created the railway lines to create employment. The problem is we don't have qualified leaders to run this government. We need people that are qualified, that are leaders, and not going to redistribute their wealth to themselves, but rather to distribute it to the people that need it.
Firstly, I think, Peter Hain, it will be good for you to update yourself in development in Zimbabwe, because already there are 4 books written by Europeans on the success of the Zimbabwean land reform program, as we speak. In fact, our former president, begging...
They have to import food then?
No, of course, there was a crisis. There was a crisis in Zimbabwe. The UK and the US refused their part to honor their part of the agreement with President Robert Mugabe and ZANU-PF. So they took the land, and it is not true that they've given the land to their cronies. Land in Zimbabwe, more than 275 families have that land now. Before it was only 4,000 white people supported by the UK. You have not done your part, and I don't think you have any moral right to talk about Zimbabwe. But let's talk about South Africa. There is no land reform in South Africa. Eusebius, you accept that we must take the willing buyer, willing seller policy. You call it a perfect policy that must be implemented. You say us as black people must buy back our land, which was taken by arms, which was stolen from us, and then we must take this money and give it to those who have done so. It is unacceptable. The ANC does not have a land reform program. What the ANC has, it's a piece of paper which says, buy back the land.
No, the ANC itself doesn't understand, for example, that it doesn't have a constitution. The ANC, I'll give you one factual example, Andile. The ANC, for example, labors under the legal illusion that it's compulsory in law to pay market price. It doesn't even understand its own flexibility with the existing problem. It's a governance problem, not a policy problem.
All right, the man behind there in the striped pullover, you say, yes.
Instead of policies saving the interest of the people, they are still keeping on saving the interest of the few. You get the picture. So already in that case, that keeps, as a result of that, we cannot actually visualize anything that will actually be of any benefit to those who are dispossessed.
We're here to discuss the legacy of Nelson Mandela and what it's going to mean for the future of our country. Andile spoke earlier about how it's dangerous to pick and choose which Mandela you want to celebrate. He was radical, he wasn't only a peacemaker. I would argue that this very fashionable word, radical, which is really just another word for let's throw out reconciliation, let's throw out the Constitution, and let's do what our gut tells us, which is let's get revenge. All of this talk about radicalism is to fundamentally abandon Mandela's legacy. Mandela was at the forefront of the construction of our Constitution, which does advocate a willing buyer, willing seller system, not just for fun, but because we have to have an economic base from which to grow our economy and enable more and more people to buy land and to become part of the rural economy. And Andile, it is buying land. But you know who buys the land? The government buys the land on behalf of black people who were dispossessed from land ownership under apartheid and under colonialism. Let me finish. It's not black people themselves who are funding land reform. It's meant to be funded by the state. The state is meant to provide black South Africans with capital to buy land. It's meant to provide them with the training and the means to be able to farm that land and enable us to grow our rural economy and feed our nation. That's how you grow an economy and you drive reconciliation, not with cheap answers to complex questions.
The woman up there on the right. The woman right on the far right there, yes. If we can just get a microphone to you.
When we talk about the land, I feel having that pain. Because to me, land is part of what you call economy. It's our wealthy as South Africans. When you talk about the land issue being supposed to be buy and whatever, we are facing a problem here, whereby I'm just talking to all of you, the panel which is there. We are facing a problem here when, one, there will be the issue of weight. We are still doing policies. You will hear from us. Wait, but when are we looking and watching? This cake of wealth which we are looking is finished. You are eating this cake, and us at the grassroots level here, we don't even get the leftovers of what you are around there trying to distribute whatever slice of cake over to yourself. We are facing that problem. Now you always say, well, now we're talking about we know, we have the pain. This legacy, we know, we've been crying there. At our grassroots, wherever you cannot even see us. We know this legacy. We are having a problem when you say that we respect the legacy of Mr. Mandela of saying reconciliation, forgiveness, but can that happen without reparation? Yeah. Without asking?
All this debate about racism, whites and everything, I want to ask Ndila, is there a place for whites in South Africa?
Yes, absolutely. There's a place for whites in South Africa, and that place must be in a just society. The idea of reparation is important. We can't say, let us unite, let us be in reconciliatory mode, when we have not addressed the historical question that has made us apart. You cannot say, well, I must be friends with you. When you come to my house, you kick me out. We meet in the street. You say we must be friends, but must not talk about the house you have taken from me. Okay. This is what white people do. Peter, can I just make this
point?
Hold
on, no.
What are we going to do?
No. You always make 3 points when you have room for one. Pick Bertha.
Yes, if I will be allowed.
Yes, you're allowed.
David, I really think that first of all, we must at least have a credible picture of the total South Africa. More than half is so arid and unproductive that it is very difficult to survive there. The most productive agricultural land is in Limpopo, Mpumalanga, KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape and Western Cape. And the problem at the present moment is, of course, land that was taken away must be restored. But there's also a duty on us to make sure that our black commercial farms have the experience and must be assisted, to do the right choices as far as seeds, the crops.
All right, when you say land that was taken away must be restored, do you mean all white land must be taken back and given?
No.
What do you mean by land that was taken away must be restored?
Well, in many cases, black tribal people, traditional land was taken away to consolidate the homelands. The National Party thought we could escape from the immorality of apartheid by creating independent states like Transkei, Ciskei, Venda, Botswana, and thus escape. We spent billions creating Mafeking in Tata.
But that was part of apartheid, the homeland policy.
Yes, I say so.
It's part of apartheid. You can't justify it.
I didn't try to justify. Would you just listen for a moment before you make remarks, Peter Ryan? My point is this. It was for us an escape route to escape from the immorality of apartheid, but it didn't work. You couldn't unmesh the economic integration. And that is why the great challenge was then for South Africa. You either have to remove apartheid altogether, you could not reform it. You had to remove it altogether and start negotiating with the ANC leadership for a new South Africa, a new constitution with all the values that we must adhere to and that would contain the legacy of Nelson Mandela, and we succeeded in that. Okay. We did succeed in this.
No, we've only got a few minutes left, sadly. I wish that if more women put their hands up, I'll call on them as we go along. But let's take this question now from Khotso Mashabela, please. Khotso Mashabela.
How does the government deal with white-collar crime and corruption, especially when it has been committed by those who occupy the highest offices?
How does the government deal better with white-collar crime and corruption, especially when it's been committed by those who occupy the highest office? Lindiwe Zulu, it's a question for you.
First and foremost, it is this government that has put systems in place. And those systems in place, well, you know, it is also good for people to be tolerant. We came here to listen to each other. We came here not to poke at each other. So, it is this very government that has put in place systems to deal with white-collar crime. It is this very government, through its constitution, which is a live constitution, through institutions which it has put in place. And by the way, the very public protector was not born somewhere. It is this government that put that office of the public protector in place. And the public protector is doing her responsibility. She has all the powers to catch, and by the way, everybody has got the right to complain, write letters to all institutions that deal with corruption.
And are people convinced that this is happening, do you think?
Of course they are convinced.
Oh, they are, so there's no problem.
No, no. I'm not saying there is no problem. I'm not saying there is no problem. Yes, there is a problem. The fact that there are institutions that are in place that our citizens have to take advantage of means this government is committed. And it doesn't matter what level of the office. Here I'm talking about the public protector. The public protector is investigating.
David,
the public protector is investigating.
Sorry, but your audiences in England must listen to the response, because this is a political lie on the part of the ANC. Let me continue, right? There are two important wrongs in what Lindiwe is saying. Number one, the fact that in theory we have institutions of oversight doesn't mean that they are culturally embedded in the political system. The very public protector that she's talking about is coming under very explicit pressure from the ANC government that gets its big wigs out to ask her whether she has a political agenda. So don't praise the public protector's office for existing, but then secretly put pressure on her. Number two, if you want to deal to answer that question directly with this problem, there are things that haven't been done yet that you can. In the private sector, firstly, let's stop calling it collusion, it's corruption. Let's make sure that we criminalize the behavior, not just fining them 10% of profits, which they can make the consumer pay for. And finally, when it comes to state-based corruption, you need something which you lack currently, which is a political leadership that can publicly flog corruption in its midst. Where's the best example of that not happening? President Jacob Zuma being silent while we are asking questions about a swimming pool apparently being security.
All right. Yes. I said I'd come to you on the gangway there, yes.
Right. You say that the government is very committed to dealing with white-collar crime, and I'm very aware that there's a lot of crime within the government, and there's a lot of corruption, and I'm very aware that the media tends to focus on that as if corruption is a black government thing, whereas there's a lot of corruption in the private sector. Just an example, any government corruption story belongs on the front page. I myself looked in the Mail and Guardian when the Murray and Roberts corruption case came out. It was on a page, like page 10 or something. So I'm just going to leave that aside, but I'll put it out there. What I want to ask you is, if the government is dedicated to rooting out corruption and white-collar corruption, you said that this is a platform for us to discuss such issues. What will the ANC do if it is found, and I'm sure we all have an opinion on this, but if it is found that Jacob Zuma actually did use taxpayers' money, incorrectly so and immorally so, to build his house? Don't give me a political answer. What will the ANC do?
You'll have to answer. It's fair you should answer, but you must answer briefly.
It's not complicated. Okay. It's not complicated.
Give the answer then.
Once there is an investigation, there is an open investigation, there are processes for those investigations, number one. Number two, there is Parliament. And this question, by the way, don't forget that it came from Lindiwe Mazibuko sitting here. Mm-hmm. She has had the opportunity, even in Parliament, to question the president, standing there at the podium and pose her questions. When I talk about institutions, I mean, we have never said as the African National Congress, just because you are a president.
What will happen?
All right, she's given her answer.
Just because you are a president.
All right.
Just because you're a president does not give you immunity from the institutions taking action against
right,
you.
That's your answer. Lindiwe Mazibuko.
I think you've hit the nail. I think you've hit the nail on the head.
Is that not the answer you were hoping for?
No,
there's no escape?
That was not an answer. You've hit the nail on the head. The problem with corruption in this country is that people feel like there's no accountability. Somebody misuses public funds for personal use. A big business engages in cartels and collusion. It is corruption straightforward. And they're able to budget in their annual budget for how much they'll have to pay the Competition Commission for engaging in that corruption and engaging in that collusion. It feels like there are no consequences for people who misuse public money or who misuse public trust. And so the real question that you're posing is an important one. I'm committed to the fact that if President Zuma has been found to misuse public money for his home in Gandla, he must be fired. And Parliament has the power to fire him because Parliament is the institution that hires him. We elect him at the end of the election, and the Constitution enables us to fire him.
But that's what Lindiwe said.
That's what I
That's
said.
what she said.
I don't think you did say it. I'd like to hear what the
said
ANC
Parliament
will do.
I did.
You see, but you're not an MP, Ms. Zulu. You're not an MP. You're a representative of the ANC. What will the ANC do if President Zuma is found
The
guilty?
question, Lindiwe, is do you think the ANC, if that is true, hypothetically, should the ANC support him being recalled and impeached?
The African National Congress has made it very clear. If any of us are found in any space of corruption, action must be taken.
Okay.
And we've made it very clear. And how different
All right. The man in the third row there, you, sir. The man there.
What you just said, I don't
Let's just
agree
hear
with
him.
you. From what happened in Potchefstroom recently, where the mayor got basically caught doing corruption and he got promoted by the ANC. How can you say that you do take
The
action
mayor of
against those people?
Potchefstroom got caught in corruption and was promoted.
Potchefstroom got caught doing corruption and he got promoted.
Extraordinary occurrence.
Well, I think
in Potchefstroom, the ANC fired its own corrupt mayor, and what happened? The ANC councillors who fired the corrupt ANC mayors were fired by the ANC from the
All
city
right.
council. There's no accountability.
Peter Hay, no accountability in this country.
The problems that the ANC is facing in government is to do with two things, it seems to me. One, corruption that goes from local government right to the top. And secondly, lack of delivery. For example, educating double the number of children than pre-apartheid days, but very poor school standards. That's got to be dealt with. But I just want to also say, celebrate what you've achieved and what the ANC has achieved. Millions more people getting housing, millions more people getting electricity, millions more getting water. Incomes going up. A great deal has been achieved, and you can't forget that.
Peter, there's a very important qualification to what you are saying, because if I may, just in 20 seconds, the entire theme that have run out of Peter's commentary this evening in an attempt to create balance, and I love you to bits, you're one of my favorite South African-born British politicians, the only one, is that Yes, there are problems, but in the long-term view, you guys are doing well. What's important for us as South Africans to do, Peter, is to say, you know what, we're sick of thinking of ourselves as a teenage democracy. Let's not engage in what one writer rightly calls an anthropology of low expectations. We must have high standards of expectations.
All right, and the last point from you, sir, yes. Ron? The man on the gangway here. No, the man on... I want to go to the man on the gangway here. There, you, sir, yes. In the brown jacket.
In the whole discussion of corruption, I think there is lack of emphasis on protecting the whistleblowers, for example. That's one element. And the other question that I wanted to direct directly to Comrade Lindiwe Zulu is that when are they going to recall Jacob Zuma? Because we are tired of his messing up.
All right, well, that point has been made. You know, the terrible thing is our hour is up. Cheers. Go on, then. No, you've spoken already.
Yeah.
You have, haven't you? No, I'm not going to go to somebody who's spoken already. Who hasn't spoken? The lady in the front here. Wait. All right, there's somebody there. Wait. I'm going to the lady here in the front. Yes. And then I'll take 1 point over there. Yes.
When all is said
Shh, please.
When all is said and done, this is a much nicer country than it was pre-1994.
Okay. Thank you very much. Our hour is up, I'm afraid. Question time is off the air for 3 weeks now while the UK Parliament takes a break over Christmas. We're going to be back on January the 9th in Lewisham in London, and then on the 16th of January in Durham. And if you'd like to come to either of those programmes, either reply via our website or call us on 0330 123 9988. If you're listening to this on 5 Live, you can continue the debate on Question Time Extra Time. I'm very grateful to all our panellists who came here to take part, and to all of you, and I'm sorry to those of you who didn't get a word in, but I'm grateful to those of you who did speak. Thank you very much indeed, and from Question Time in Johannesburg, good night.
Next on BBC One, more reaction to Nelson Mandela's death and political leaders' Christmas cards on This Week.